Welcome to the Longest Take podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Longest Take podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Tony Wash, an accomplished filmmaker known for his distinctive voice in independent horror and genre cinema. As the founder of Scotchworthy Productions, Tony has carved out a reputation for creating bold, atmospheric films that blend practical effects, strong storytelling, and a deep appreciation for the craft. Some of his work includes The Rake, Skeletons in the Closet, and High on the Hog featuring the late Sid Haig. But also we talk a little bit about his upcoming project, Better Luck Than Chuck, which is this amazing game show concept that I imagine he cannot wait to be able to show everybody. Thank you for tuning in. So first things first, what are your top 5 favorite movies?
Like just horror or any
Anything.
genre?
Yeah, it can be anything.
I mean, that's such a tough question. Since my favorite genre is horror, I have a top 3 horror movie list that I always say it's The Shining, Alien, and John Carpenter's The Thing. So it would be hard for me to remove any one of those 3 from a top 5 list that spreads across all genres. But, you know, I can easily add a 4th to that, which would be Shawshank Redemption. But then from there, the 5th one could be changed out at all times. I mean, Empire Strikes Back, Indiana Jones, and the why can't I think of it? Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, The Goonies, Night of the Creeps. What else? Silence of the Lambs. So I'd say I can give you a top 8 if that works for you.
That works.
You know, favorite comedy, probably Revenge of the Nerds is like my go-to classic comedy. Action, Big Trouble in Little China, or maybe Rambo First Blood Part 2, you know, that type of stuff, or Aliens, you know, so.
Yeah, no, that's a great list. You capture a lot of the classics there. And you mentioned Shawshank Redemption, and I can't help but notice at least one Stephen King book in your background there. So I imagine you're a big Stephen King guy.
Yeah, I was introduced to Stephen King when I was probably 12 years old, and my dad had a paperback copy of Needful Things. The year may be a little off. It might have been 93 or 94. I don't know when that came out in the early 90s, but I know I was in junior high, and he had it at the house, and I was just like fascinated by the cover. I don't even know why. It's not a particularly scary cover. It's just the colors of it, and you know, the way that his name popped off the, you know, it was kind of that embossed, you know, kind of metal, like, you know, kind of looking name that had like the, you know, it was like shimmering or whatever. Why can't I talk? Foil.
Right. Yeah.
Stamped or whatever is what it is. My wife's a stationer. I should understand paper terminology better. Yeah, so I saw that book, and even though it was 700 pages long, I just said I knew who Stephen King was. Obviously, I'd seen The Thing. It. Why did I say The Thing? I'd seen it on TV at a sleepover once, and probably a handful of other movies. And at that point, I'd seen a number of horror films, so I knew who Stephen King was. And I grew up on Monster Squad, and so who doesn't know the Stephen King Rules T-shirt? So I was obviously intrigued to read it, and had read a lot of R.L. Stine prior to Goosebumps coming out. This was his earlier stuff. Christopher Pike, you know, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And so it was about that time where I guess my dad felt it was okay for me to graduate to Stephen King, which, you know, there's a hell of a lot of stuff in Stephen King, like sodomy and
yeah, it gets pretty crazy.
Yeah, it gets pretty crazy. It's stuff that you don't find. And you know, like probably the 3rd Stephen King book I read was Gerald's Game, because that came out, you know, shortly after Needful Things. I think it was Needful Things, then Dolores Claiborne, and then Gerald's Game, I believe. Yeah, because I got them up on the shelf there. I got all my first editions. So probably shouldn't have been reading it at that point, but nowadays, you know, 10-year-olds know what all that crap is because of YouTube. So
yeah, they have access to literally anything online, so they get all of that. But I think that's awesome that you said Needful Things, because that's actually one of the more recent Stephen King books I read. Maybe a couple months ago I finished that one up. And if you ever watch Rick and Morty, they do an episode that is like basically a whole spin on that concept. Pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's you're not the first person to like. It's not that you said it's your favorite, but Needful Things has been coming up a lot. Some YouTubers I watch have been bringing it up, and definitely one of the pivotal novels.
It's very interesting because I feel like it is a pivotal novel. It was like I'd say it was kind of the last in his, like, I can't really say that I really cared for anything after that I've read so far, and I take that back because I do really love Dr. Sleep. I am a big fan of that book and of Mike Flanagan's movie. I think they did a wonderful job of adding to that story and Danny's, kind of life without being too, without franchising it too much, if that makes sense,
I agree.
But I like The Outsider. I thought that was cool. Haven't read The Institute, and I've heard that's got a lot of really good stuff, but I know you don't want to spend all day talking about Stephen.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me. All I have to say is that I continue to want to read more of his stuff, because Needful Things is not necessarily scary. It's more of a thriller, with obviously supernatural tones to it. And as a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old reading it, I don't feel like it had anything in it that particularly attracted me to horror, except for the fact that it was something that I probably shouldn't have been reading. And I knew that at the time. That my father let me read his book, and holy shit, this is cool. So, I enjoy The Shining and Salem's Lot and It and Christine, The Stand. Those are such better books, in my opinion, than Needful Things. But I like The Talisman a lot, Eyes of the Dragon, Cycle of the Werewolf. So I could go on.
Did you ever get into The Dark Tower? Because I know you mentioned Eyes of the Dragon and The Talisman. Those kind of, those predated the Dark Tower.
So it's interesting because I just reread The Talisman 4 or 5 months ago. Took me about a month to get through it a second time. I hadn't read it since I was probably 14 or 15. So I honestly did not enjoy it as much the second time around, and I think the reason is simply because when I was a kid, I was the same age, and so it's like I was reading it as if I was this character, and I don't remember his name because I do too much shit and forget things easily. But I you see, and you're drawing a blank too.
Yeah.
It's like
I want to say Jake, but I'm pretty sure that's the Dark Tower kid. I haven't read The Dark Tower, but Jack. Yeah, I think it's Jack.
So it's like I think about that, and I'm like, is that because no, that's never mind. I'm not even gonna go there. I'm not gonna say, because then people are gonna chastise me. But yeah, so I didn't like it as much now, because I think that when I read it when I was younger, I could relate to him, because I was like, man, if this was me doing this, that would be pretty cool. So I feel like I've read fantasy novels that are a little more intense than The Talisman was. The whole sequence of him in the like boys' home with the weirdo, that ran it and everything, like it was very intense. But at the same time, I just rereading it, I was like, yeah, I don't like this as much as I remember it. And I didn't read Black House, so I will still delve into that at some point in my life. Eyes of the Dragon I haven't read since I was in high school, but I do remember liking it a lot. And I read Drawing of the Three and The Gunslinger. I haven't gone past that. I've been told by many people that it's just such a great series, and The Wolves of Kala is the best one. So, or everybody has their different versions of what their favorite is. So I do have to revisit it. I just, that takes a lot of effort to get through all 7 books. 7 now, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it's funny. I'm on Drawing of the Three. I haven't picked it up in a couple years, but everybody, the whole thing with it is people don't like Gunslinger that much, and they don't like the last book. But everything in between, it's like usually that's where you hear a lot of the praise. I just think it's funny how it's bookended by these two books that people just don't always like as much.
Well, and the great thing about that is, like, Stephen King is very fortunate. I mean, obviously, he's a hell of a writer. There's no contest. He is arguably the most prolific and talented writer in, of the last handful of generations. When you get away from all the classics like Steinbeck and, Dickens and whoever else, Edgar Allan Poe, whoever. But, like, he's obviously, he worked his ass off to get to that point. He is the one person that will tell you, if you want to be a writer, don't fucking say you want to be a writer. Go and write every day. And so and that's how I am about filmmaking. I say, like, don't say you want to be a film director. Go out and make a movie. Use your phone, whatever. He obviously has the freedom and flexibility to do whatever he wanted. And he has had that freedom for probably 40 years at this point. But like to be able to have the faith from your audience, from your reader base, to come out with a shitty book that no one really cares for and still have everybody come back to read the second one and the third and the fourth and the fifth, that's an impressive feat, to retain an audience like that. And he's certainly done that. Not everybody likes Cujo. Not everybody likes, whatever else. Name your least favorite Stephen King book, and yet he's still worth $500 million, so he's doing something right.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been quite a fan of his recent stuff, like the new age of Stephen King. And my favorite book, and it's kind of a slow read in the beginning, but if you get a chance, read Revival. That's my favorite King book, and it's really, I just love how it ends. There's two parts to the ending, and it goes places, and I'm just like, wow, this was on an existential level. It was kind of scary.
Yeah, I haven't really been told much about Revival. I know it just came out in the last year or two.
No, that one was 2015.
Oh, that's 2015.
Yeah.
Holly just came out.
Yeah.
Okay. So since Nightmares and Dreamscapes, I read everything up to Nightmares and Dreamscapes except for The Wastelands. And then after Nightmares and Dreamscapes, I took a long time off through college, and in my 20s, I didn't read ever for leisure. And even in my early 30s, jumped back in with The Outsider and with Dr. Sleep. And those are really the only two at this point that I've read post Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I do want to check out The Institute because I've heard a lot about that. And my goddaughter is a big Stephen King fan, and she's like, her favorite is Bag of Bones. So I do need to jump into that one here. And that might be the next on my reading list. Right now, I'm reading two books. I'm reading Night Shift again because I haven't read it in forever. So I'm about 7 stories through that. And I'm halfway through Slither by John Halkin. If you're familiar with horror paperbacks in general.
Not Slither.
If you search Slither paperback online, you'd see the poster or like the cover of it, and you're probably like, oh yeah, I totally have seen that image before. I checked out that Paperbacks from Hell book from Grady Hendrix, and it like totally got me back invested in horror and collecting horror novels. And so I broke out all of mine from high school. And obviously you can kind of see behind me maybe a little bit here that I just went to half price books and garage sales and estate sales and just went crazy.
Yeah. And those are all paperbacks, right?
These are all paperbacks. I've got hardcovers over here. Like I said, I have a shelf of Stephen King first editions, pretty much from different seasons to present. I have everything. I have a bunch of like others over here. Like I have Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon first editions, The Deep by Peter Benchley, which I think is pretty cool. And then I have a bunch of other Stephen Kings that are over here that I went to an estate sale, and he was a book club member, so they're not first editions, but they're first edition book clubs. So I have everything from Carrie all the way through to like, I think it was Pet Sematary, and just that, like, to me, that's still really cool, even though they're not worth anything. They're still 45 years old. And, that Carrie book club edition came out, I think, in like, I don't know, 75 or 76. So it's like,
wow.
Like nobody knew who the hell Stephen King was, because that came out when only Salem's Lot and Carrie were out, or maybe, The Shining was coming out. And it's like, it's just cool to me. So
yeah, that's awesome. And the thing about King is like I try reading other horror and like I enjoy it, but nobody captures the way Stephen King does it, with like the characterization and like the way he just kind of like puts you into this world and makes it feel lived in and everything. I've been Robert McCammon gets close. Dan Simmons got close in Summer of Night, but yeah, Stephen King's doing something that I really haven't come across.
Yeah, I kind of have, I ride the fence with that. I appreciate King's descriptors at this point in my life. When I was 15 reading, it was not as easy to get through, because it's like, I don't want to spend 5 pages with you describing a bedroom, it doesn't matter to me. But now I can appreciate that detail. As a teenager, I loved Dean Koontz. I thought that Watchers, Whispers, Darkfall, Phantoms, there's so many books that he came out with that were more concise. They were more action packed, and I felt like he could write action better than Stephen King could. And so my favorite book to this day is not a King book. It's Dean Koontz's Watchers. And I think a lot of people actually agree with me on that. That's tied with that and The Relic, if you've ever read the Relic by Douglas Preston and Child. So that's a great one too. The Relic and its sequel, Reliquary, great books.
So is the Relic similar to the movie at all? Like, was the movie based off of? Okay.
Correct.
And that was Del Toro?
No.
I'm thinking of Mimic. Mimic was Del Toro then.
You're thinking of Mimic, yes. The Relic was the museum with the monster in the museum with Penelope Ann Miller and Tom Sizemore was the officer in it, the police officer. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll check out the book. Definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's really good.
And I heard that Dean Koontz actually has sold more books than Stephen King in their careers. Yeah.
What?
I don't know where I heard that, but they were saying that Dean Koontz actually surpasses King in terms of sales.
Well, he has more books.
That might be it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, like, I mean, even if I just look at my collection, I feel like Dean Koontz just has more, because he spent a good amount of like the 70s writing under different names, and a lot of his stuff was like not even horror. I don't think he even got into horror until the middle to late part of the 70s. Prior to that, I think he was doing sci-fi and fantasy or something. I don't know. I've never read any of those, but my aunt gave me a copy of Cold Fire, which again, probably my least favorite book by Dean Koontz. And for some reason, I was just attracted to it. And I think I gave it back to her. I was probably 14 or 15. I said, I didn't really like it. It wasn't really scary. And she said, well, my favorite Dean Koontz book is Whispers. And Whispers, which, just for kind of your sake, I collected all of the Berkeley editions of his books. So I've got all of these.
That's awesome.
versions. And so the Whispers one with the hearse on the front is it's such a good book. It's so well written. The twist is so good that highly recommend it. So
yeah, I'm gonna write that down for sure, because Dean Koontz is an author I never really dove into much at all, but I've been meaning to. But when you're into books and reading, you tend to get a large catalog, a backlog of stuff to get through, and then you never get through any of it. Or you know what that's like. So
I'm trying to do a book a month at this point. I did that last year. I was really proud of myself, and I felt like my brain thanked me. So I'm currently on track to hit that, because I read 2 books in February, but this last month we went to Denver for the premiere of our horror trivia game show, Better Luck Than Chuck, and this last weekend, and that gave me some time on the plane to read. So that's why I jumped in a night shift and got through like 7 stories in that, like I said. So trying to play catch up, but I don't have a ton of time to read, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
As much as I love the book talk, I'll go to my next question. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. So just kind of go into a little bit of your relationship with Bloody Disgusting, and what you do with Screenbox, and even with the Bloody Bites series. Kind of all-encompassing type of question there.
Sure. So I want to say it was about 2008, 2007. I started going to my family accountant because I was now an adult, and I incorporated my business, Scotchworthy Productions. And so I had to start doing adulting. And my accountant, my family's accountant, was very intrigued by the fact that I was a horror filmmaker. And at the time, I had my first movie, It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want to, completed, and it had premiered and won a bunch of awards at festivals. And so my accountant was like, that's really cool. I want to invest in your movies. And so he started giving me money every year when I would go to see him, which was super cool. And he also had another family that were his clients, which happened to be the Owens. And Tom Owen is one of the two originators of the Bloody Disgusting brand. Okay. The website.
Yeah.
It's him and Brad Miska. And so my accountant said, you should reach out to him because, I have another client who has a horror website. You should reach out to him and see if he'll, promote your movie. So I go, well, what website? And he goes, Bloody Disgusting. And my jaw dropped. I was like, holy crap. Like, not only do you know the guy who owns it, one of the guys that owns it, but on top of it, like, you're saying that this guy's in Chicago. Like, that's amazing. And so went to a convention. Tom was not at the table. The Bloody Disgusting had a booth in the vendor room. He wasn't at the table, but Brad was. I talked to him. I gave him a copy of It's My Party. He watched it 6 months later, walked up to me at another convention and was like, hey, dude, I just want to let you know I'm sorry it took me so long. I get so many movies from people that I throw them in a corner of my living room and watch them if I can, which is hardly ever. He's like, I loved your movie. It was so good. It was fun. It was unique. The DVD is a choose your own adventure. So you can actually play through the movie as the viewer and pick the direction the characters go.
Oh, that's awesome.
If you kill them, you got to start over again. And so he's like, it was so fun. It was cool. And he's like, let's keep in touch. And so, fast forward 5 years later, 6 years later, and we started creating this show called World of Death, where we were emailing all of these horror filmmakers from around the world saying, hey, you have a short horror film. If you want to feature it, let's collect all of our short films together and we'll do a DVD and we'll sell it at conventions and you can sell it to your friends for $5 a copy or whatever. And that we started reaching out to people and everybody was like, yeah, let's do it. And it soon became like 300 movies that we had that wanted to be a part of World of Death. So we realized instead of doing DVDs, why don't we go and talk to Bloody Disgusting and see if they'll like present it on their website or on YouTube or whatever. And so we did that for 2 years. We showcased over 500 short films. We represented more than 50 countries' filmmakers. And then in pretty much in like we went live with that in 2016. And so then in 2020, we shut down World of Death and we turned it into Bloody Bites, which is the new iteration where we, again, feature short films from all over the world, horror, sci-fi, thriller. And we run it through Screambox. Bloody Disgusting and Screambox were both purchased separately by this big mega media company called Cinedigm. Now it's called Cineverse. And so Cineverse basically said, we acquired Screambox, which is a streaming service similar to Shudder. And we have Bloody Disgusting, which is a brand and a website and a podcast network. We're going to combine these two brands together and we're going to just try and create this platform that promotes all things horror and produces all things horror. And so Bloody Bites is now a seasonal show that runs on Screambox. You can find it on Amazon, Pluto, Tubi. You can find the Screambox app on every streaming service, Roku, yada, yada, yada. You can find, we also have a streaming channel, kind of like a cable network. It's called Screambox TV that runs 24/7 horror movies and shows with commercial breaks and somewhat censorship. And you can find that through the Screambox app or on Amazon Freevee, Plex TV, Roku channel, all over the place. So it's pretty cool. I've been working for them full-time for a little over a year, about a year and a half now, and have been like basically part of Bloody Disgusting since 2016. and love it. I mean, if I could go back to 15-year-old Tony, who worked at the video store when I was in high school, and could walk up to that guy and say, "Hey kid, you love horror movies so much. Well, guess what? In 25 years, you're actually going to be working for a horror movie company." I wouldn't have believed it. So I truly consider it a blessing. I was actually texting with Brad earlier and just, saying it's a blessing to be involved with the brand as synonymous with horror, with quality horror as Bloody Disgusting, and to have the opportunity to program a horror platform like Screambox is pretty damn cool.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like the dream job, especially for somebody who from the beginning has loved horror. You've got a lot of, there's so much there. And Cineverse, I didn't put that together, but I've seen Cineverse all over the place, especially recently. And I didn't know that they had acquired Bloody Disgusting and Screambox.
Yeah,
very interesting.
Yeah, they I don't know when they acquired Screambox necessarily, but in 2021 they purchased Bloody Disgusting from Brad and Tom and brought it under the Cinedigm umbrella. Right. And then last year, I want to say it was either last year or 2023, Cinedigm kind of went through some rebranding of its own and became Cineverse, which is the name of their streaming platform. They have a streaming platform similar to Amazon where you can check out all of Cineverse's streaming services. They have Screambox, they have Midnight Pulp, which is all exploitation, martial arts, psychedelic. It's a really fun channel and platform to check stuff out on. Like late night sex movies, that type of shit, like not Red Shoe Diaries, but like the Emmanuel movies and stuff from the 80s that, a kid like me was like desperate to try and find out
right.
Next late night when my mom went to bed,
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's awesome. My favorite thing about those types of companies just in general is just you could tell through their passion, just their love for movies. And that's like, I don't know, that should be the minimum when you are a media company. You gotta to some extent love what you're putting out there.
Yeah, well, okay, let's be completely real. Like every company is just that. It's a company. It is a group of people that are run by business people that want to make money so that the company is successful and thus can perpetuate itself.
Of course.
And it is a dream job. There is no way I will ever argue with a single person or take for granted the fact that I am programming a horror platform. It is a dream come true. I will be forever grateful to Brad Miska and Tom Owen for giving me the opportunity to become a part of Screambox and Bloody Disgusting, and for their friendship, over the years. They are the same age as me. We all live in the Chicago suburbs, and so it was a tremendous just connection, all thanks to my accountant who has passed away. So RIP to Jim Moles. But
rest in peace.
Yes, exactly. But there is obviously it's a corporation, so there's a lot of people that have to make decisions, and I'm not. Thankfully, I have people that help me with stuff, but at the same point in time, I also have people who I have to get to approve things, and so it's just it's working through the bureaucracy of a corporation. But at the end of the day, it's a full-time job with benefits, and I'm not going to argue that, because before this, I was working overnights at a water plant. I would work midnight to noon, 12-hour shifts each week. And it was a good government job, but at the end of the day, it was miserable. It was affecting my health. I did it for 6 years. My wife hates those years of our relationship because we never saw each other. I would sleep during the day. And so it got me out of that and gave me the ability to work my dream job. And I'll always be thankful for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. What is the origin of Scotchworthy Productions? How did that all start? Kind of, what did that trajectory look like? And, what's coming soon,
Sure. That's a pretty big question if I'm going to kind of run through the gamut of the history. So I pretty much always knew, since, again, I was in I'd say probably junior high, I knew I wanted to make movies. I loved horror. I wrote a script when I was probably 11 years old to do a kung fu movie in my backyard with my friends. We never shot it, but my mom had a video camera. My plan was to shoot it and just do all sorts of really fun camera angles, to do a lot of what Spielberg did in his early years, like when he was a kid, making movies using like camera angles to make things look bigger, and practical effects that made things look more grandiose than they actually were. High school, worked at a video store, worked at 2 video stores actually, and so that really built my appreciation for film and for the horror genre specifically. I was introduced by a guy who was probably 20, 21 who worked there, to the horror movies that I didn't know as a kid. When I was a kid, I was like Halloween, Friday the 13th, that's what horror was. And then it's like, he's like, oh, well, you like Halloween, that's John Carpenter. Have you ever watched The Fog? Have you ever watched The Thing? Have you ever seen Prince of Darkness? And I'm like, no, because you look at those as a kid, and those box covers of the VHSs were never really like the Thing poster. It's cool, but it's not like eye-catching to a 9-year-old,
Right.
Return of the Living Dead is eye-catching to a 9-year-old.
100%.
So it was like I was really just drawn into filmmaking and the horror genre more. And so I did a little bit of filmmaking in college, just independent study type stuff. A couple of years after college, I decided to go out to Pittsburgh to go to the Tom Savini Special Effects School. And while I was there, I decided to shoot my first movie. I said, I've been talking about making movies my whole life, which at that point I was 24. I said, I need to stop talking and start fucking doing it, And so I did. I took my life savings and I bought a camera, and I shot It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want To in an abandoned funeral home with no electricity, no plumbing, no heating. In February in Pittsburgh, it was cold as hell. The actresses probably hated me every minute of it, but it was amazing. All of my friends from Savini High, as we like to call it, helped with it, and they worked on the crew. They did the special effects with me, and a lot of those people are still working in the industry to this day doing special effects work. And at that point, I've always known that my company would have a zombie director for its kind of logo, and so that's where Charlie comes from, which is the zombie with my logo, and who is also actually the co-host of the movie Skeletons in the Closet, as well as the co-host of our horror trivia game show Better Luck Than Chuck, which is hopefully coming soon, that we can talk about if you want a bit. And then Scotchworthy Productions, the name itself, summer before senior year of college, I worked for Cutco selling kitchen knives to all of my friends and family and their parents. And it was a really great job. It was basically just a bunch of us 20-something-year-olds partying every weekend and, selling knives that were way, way too expensive for people to justify purchasing. But while I was doing that, I was working with this guy named Bill Balick, who was going to Columbia, which is the film school and art school in Chicago. He was going there for cinematography. And we started talking and, binging Twin Peaks together and stuff like that. And so we started seeing horror movies in the theater. And at that time, which was the early 2000, 2001, a lot of horror movies were coming out that I wasn't really thrilled with. I just didn't enjoy the style. They were overproduced. This was right before Saw came out, which kind of redefined what the horror genre was in cinema. So before that, there was just a lot of stuff that I was not a big fan of. And so we had a sales weekend for Cutco where 2 district managers made a bet saying whichever district sells more than the other one, the loser has to buy the other guy a bottle of Louis Trey, which is like a $1,500 bottle of scotch or something. I've never had it. I don't know anything about it. So Bill and I would start going to the theater, watching horror movies, and we'd say, do we think we're going to see a horror movie in the theater that's better than one that we're going to create? Or are we going to see one? Are we going to make one first? And we bet a bottle of cheaper scotch,
Right.
We'll talk about Glenlivet or something. And so we said, let's bet a bottle of scotch on it. And so then we started going to the movie, and after a movie, we'd come out and say, was that Scotchworthy or not? And that's where it came from. Bill is now a teacher, I believe. and I'm still making movies. So
Yeah, still chugging along there.
chugging along.
It's funny because my next question was about the muck, and we were going to get into Stephen King a little bit, but we already spent a lot of time talking about that. But I just want to say again that yeah, the Raft, I really like that. You know, I love when things aren't a direct adaptation, but it has like remnants of something, and I really think that the Raft is such an interesting story for you to kind of, you know, get inspiration from. I did it. It was a movie at some point, right? I think it got adapted. Yeah.
Yeah, Creepshow too.
Creepshow. Okay. Yeah. So I thought that was a really cool way to go about a short. What was the? I guess we could talk a little bit about the muck, but what was it like filming that one? Kind of what inspired you to do a project like that?
So, The Raft is my favorite short from Creepshow 2. It is next to the Crate with Fluffy, you know, from Creepshow 1. Those are my favorite from the Creepshow series, easily, by far. And I've always been a big fan of monster movies and of haunted house movies. Those are my favorite subgenres of horror, books and movies, you know, just in general. So when they were doing the ABCs of Death 2 contest, which was in 2013, with those two movies, they did a contest where one of the 26 letters, they would open it up to a contest for independent filmmakers. And then the other 25, they went and they found their buddies like Ty West and Adam Wingard to create, you know, a short. But the one letter, they opened it up to the world and said, make a short horror film that has a death from this letter. And so for ABCs of Death 2, it was the letter M. So I initially didn't want to do one. I got to a point in my career where I said I refuse to make any more short films because all they do is take up time and money and they're not marketable. And I still don't really think that they're marketable, even though I run a show called Bloody Bites that promotes short horror films. Yeah. I think that the amount of time and effort that you put into a short film could be better served, you know, developing a feature and working towards that. Because if you're willing to work on a short film for next to nothing, which is what I was doing, none of us were getting paid to make them. It's like, try and get those people together to just work on something bigger that you could sell. Even if you just get it onto like the lowest of low platforms that's streaming and you get it out there, at least then you can say it's out in the world, it is a feature, and submit it to festivals or whatever. And I'm not saying that it's not good to shoot short films. I think if anybody wants to, please, by all means, shoot a short film. Just shoot something. But right. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to waste people's time. I didn't want to waste my own money. I had 4 or 5 other friends doing a short film for the contest. So I helped, I think, 2 or 3 of them out that were in the local area for me to help with. And then that's when we started saying, well, you know, if we don't win the contest, since only one winner and there's 5 of us making movies, we're like, well, let's just combine them all together and we'll do a DVD. And at the time I was doing a lot of horror conventions, selling It's My Party and my film A Chance in Hell. I was promoting High on the Hog, which had been shot a few years prior. And so I said, you know what, like, screw it. Like, let's just do a short film this weekend at the house that I was living in, which I lived at with my cinematographer, Rob Stern, and one of our camera and lighting guys, Jim Peterson. So I said, let's just make a movie. And so initially I wanted to shoot it in the pond in our backyard where it was going to be a boy fishing with his dog. And the dog disappears when he turns to look at something and comes back and hears a splashing noise and the dog's gone. And I was going to call it the Merc. And then I'm like, there's too many variables there. I don't like working with a dog, you know, because animals are really difficult. They always say don't work with kids. I love working with kids. Most of my movies have kids in them, so I'm fine with that. But then I also said I didn't want my effects artist, Jason Kane, to have to get into the water in this pond because the pond in our backyard was just super like, no thanks, you know.
Right.
I'm not 7 foot in that, you know, and I'm the kid that was going for tadpoles when I was 7 years old. I'm not 7 foot in that thing, even with like galoshes on, you know.
Yeah.
So I said, how do we evolve it? And so I'm like, well, shit, why don't we just change it to where it's something coming out of the sink and we'll call it the Muck. And so I was like, okay, well, let's do it where it's has How about it's where it's a girl who comes home from school, like it's a cheerleader who comes home from school and she decides to wash her hair in the sink, and it comes out of the sink and attacks her in the kitchen. And I'm like, that's great. And I actually have that scene written into the feature-length version of the Muck if we ever get a chance to make it. But I thought, what would be better? I'm a product of the 80s. So anybody who's listening to this, please understand that my mentality as a horror fan comes from the generation of horror viewers that grew up watching movies that had two things in every single horror movie: violence and sex. It was very important for a movie in the 80s to have violence and sex in it if it was going to be a horror movie that caught people's attention. And you can argue that with me if you want, and you can say that by today's standards, that's not the case. But that's what I grew up on, and that's part of what I loved about the genre, because it was the stuff I wasn't supposed to see as a kid,
Right.
And so I said, what can I do to make this short that much more appealing, like in such a short time? And so it was, well, let's change it from a cheerleader coming home from high school practice. Obviously we need to make her an adult now, but let's add some nudity and let's add some more violence to it. And so I said, let's have it be a woman coming home from jazzercise, and she takes a bath and the creature attacks her in the bath. And so, obviously the Blob was a big influence because Frank Darabont's The Blob is amazing. The effects in it, the melt effects, are some of the best melt effects I've ever seen. Just such a cool movie with so many great gambits that they put the characters into, where they have to run from this jello, basically.
Yeah.
I grew up watching the Steve McQueen Blob movie, so I've always been a fan of that style of monster, this kind of ever-changing thing, that can just move through grates and under doors and stuff. And yeah, I mean, the coloring is definitely influenced by the raft. I could have made it green or blue or whatever, but I thought the brown just looked good, because when I think of something sitting in the drain, like, you pull your sister's hair clump out of the shower, you're a teenager, and it's just like, Jesus, it's brown and black and gunky. And so that's what we ran with. And we were fortunate enough to get it in South by Southwest. And when that happened, that was easily the biggest accolade of all of us in my film family at the time for our careers. And we kind of rode that wave the rest of the year. We got into a bunch of really great festivals, and you can watch the Muck in season 8 of Bloody Bites if you want. So yeah, it's definitely one I remember fondly. And thankfully my buddy Jim's house is still decorated in the 1980s style. He's never updated it. It's the house he grew up in. And I really took advantage of that. We shot the Muck in that. We shot a lot of Skeletons in the Closet in that, which is the feature that we did a few years after the Muck. So, I like, part of what I love so much about movies is production design, set dressing and wardrobe and all of that, the makeup, obviously, and makeup effects, all that kind of goes into the lump of production design. And so I like to try and do period appropriate stuff whenever possible, because I think that adds that extra element of production design that you don't get. So having an 80s house made it very easy to give us instant production design without having to really, think too hard about it.
Right. And I think that doing, like, I guess, period pieces, obviously not like ancient, but specifying like decades, it also adds a challenge. And I think that kind of providing challenges for yourself when making a project can make it all that more rewarding once you get it finished, once you're able to nail it. So I think that that's pretty awesome. I hope you're able to make a feature of the Muck, because when I was a kid, The Blob was like one of my favorite movies. That was one of my first horror movies that I liked. It was the remake from 80s something with one of the Dylans, right? Yeah.
Kevin Dillon.
Yeah, so seeing something that's reminiscent of that and a Stephen King story, I think that'd be a pretty amazing feature if you could ever do that.
Yeah, and it's a fun setup too. Like, I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to put it out there into the world and have someone consciously take it from me. But like, it's something that if we ever got the opportunity to do it, there's that, and there's one other movie that my cinematographer Rob Stern and we always talk about, and are like, dude, let's just wait until the day when someone is willing to give us like $5 million to make a movie, and let's just knock the world's socks off with these movies. So hopefully one day, keep the fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. With your film, you mentioned it a little bit ago, High on the Hog. That was one of the last projects of Sid Haig and Robert Zadar. What was it like, working with them? And the film kind of taps into this like grindhouse aesthetic with it. So kind of, what were the origins of that? And then just kind of what was the process with working with some of those actors, getting them on the project?
Sure. Yeah. High on the Hog was a really interesting and unique experience. About 2012, I had done A Chance in Hell. It was a Nazi zombie movie. It had really high production value for the time, for an independent project especially. And a lot of people in the Chicagoland area saw it and were really drawn to what Scotchworthy was doing, because they're like, wow, this is high production value. We need to like see if we can do stuff with these people. And so Rob Stern, who again is my go-to cinematographer at this point, him and Phil Ortiz are the two cinematographers that I try to work with exclusively. Rob was hired as cinematographer for High on the Hog, and Jason Kane and myself were hired to do the special effects for it. It's a grindhouse movie. It's not a horror movie, but there's still some violence and deaths and stuff in it, including a scene where someone gets their head chopped off with an axe. And so we had to, create some cool practical effects work out of silicone and stuff. So we're talking to the team about doing these things for the effects and whatnot. And the producer on the movie at the time had been at the Chicago premiere of A Chance in Hell, and was blown away. I had 750 people in the audience. It was a huge success for a screening of an independent film. And so she went to the executive producer and writer of the film and said, they were having problems with their existing director that was attached to the film. And the film had gone through a couple of bumps, in development and pre-production. And so she's like, she kept calling me and talking to me for like an hour and a half conversations, asking me about production and about directing and this and this and this. And I'm like, by the third phone call, I literally said to her, I'm like, okay, I need you to clarify whether you are going to give me like producer credit on this for all of this consultation, or are you asking me to actually direct your film for you at this point? And so she thankfully, because it's a pretty cool experience, she said, well, I'm actually thinking about replacing the director with you, but I have to talk to the executive producer about it. And so are you interested? And I'm like, yes, fuck yes, please. I had directed Tom Savini for a day when he made a cameo appearance in It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want To, because we shot it while I was going to the Savini school.
Right.
So I wasn't like uncomfortable working with talent, and I worked on Road to Perdition. I was just in locations, but I met Jude Law while I was on the set of Road to Perdition. I was 5 feet from Tom Hanks a couple of times. So it's like I felt like I was competent enough to be able to hold my cool in front of someone who I idolized, like Sid Haig. And I grew up watching Maniac Cop, so I thought it was really cool. And Tango and Cash, he's the bad guy in the prison in Tango and Cash. So it's like I was really excited about the opportunity to work with them. And Joe Estevez too. Joe Estevez is just one of those actors. He's Martin Sheen's brother, and he's in like 300 movies or something. And just so I was like really excited. And so yeah, I said yes, and they let me direct it. They hired me, and 5 days into the movie, the female producer I was speaking of, who helped me get the job, which I will always appreciate, she ended up leaving set and didn't come back.
Wow.
And so at that point, the executive producer and writer of it, Kevin, kind of called us all and was like, he called me and he called the guy whose house we were shooting the movie at, and he talked to Sid, and he's like, what are we going to do? And we basically said, like, look, if you trust Bob, who was the locations producer, and you trust Sid, and you trust Tony, and you trust Rob, the cinematographer, make us all producers on it, and we will bring this movie over the finish line. And so we spent the next 19 days, I think it was. We spent the next 19 days building one of the tightest families that I've ever worked on a film set with. We were all on set, living out in Galena, Illinois, which is on the Mississippi River, far west side of the state, 3 hours away from all of our friends and family. And we lived in a roadside motel, and we ate, drank, slept, and shit together, basically, shooting this movie for 3.5 weeks. And it was an absolute dream come true. It was working with Sid Haig was a cherished memory of mine. And one night we had a hard day of shooting, and him and I went up to him. I said, "You want to go grab a beer?" And he's like, "Fuck yeah!" And him and I went and had a couple of Busch Lights at a bar, and he told me all these fun stories about being in the business. And he gave me a lot of wonderful compliments throughout my years before he passed, and was just a good friend. And I miss him. I definitely miss him. And same thing with Robert Z'Dar. These guys have every ability to be the asshole that you hear about so often with a celebrity, not because they're necessarily assholes, but because they're tired of getting bugged,
Yep.
And Robert Z'Dar was one of the kindest people I've ever had on set. He was considerate, he was kind, he was friendly, he was outgoing, just always had a smile on his face. And so I was very grateful to have an opportunity to meet him, work with him, earn his respect as well as Sid's before their passings. And the post process of High on the Hog is definitely one that has it's been a rocky road. We had an initial cut of the movie that was very, to kind of get to your question specifically, it was bland. It was a good narrative edit, but it was ultimately bland in its telling of what was supposed to be a grindhouse exploitation film. It was very, chronological in terms of its cut sequence, and it wasn't flashy. It didn't have the film grain and all that stuff. And so when the executive producer took it out to try and sell it, he wasn't really getting any positive feedback. So we had a friend of ours at the time who had done some stuff with us named Ben, who pitched Kevin on re-editing the entire movie and making it grindhouse and exploitation the way that Kevin originally wanted it to be. And, thankfully Ben did a hell of a job with it. And there were, many weeks where Ben would come down from Wisconsin where he lived, and he would stay for a few days or a week at the house where Jim, Rob, and I lived. And we would sit in the editing room, which was Jim's sister's room when, she moved out. And so her room was still her kid room. We put a computer in there and a couch and a couple of computer chairs, and we called it the Princess Suite. And we would literally sit in there and watch Ben edit and give him ideas. And so that was a very hands-on experience for him and I to collaborate on that edit. And, I think that, I give him a lot of credit and lend, and the intensity of the edit, the seizure-inducing intensity of the edit, is owed to Ben's just desire to not look at anything for longer than 3 frames, I guess. So I think that really salvaged the film's ability to appeal to the audience it was originally meant to appeal to. And so we released it in 2019. Thankfully, I got to go out to LA and hang out with Sid at the premiere of it, which he really enjoyed the movie, and he was always supportive of it. And then, it's been out ever since. And so, it's pretty cool. Definitely something I'm proud of, and if nothing else, it makes me happy in knowing that all of us on that set had the integrity to see it through to the end. Because we could have all said, you know what? No, I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to go home and I'm going to enjoy 2.5 weeks of time off that you're paying for, executive producer, because, it's not my fault that the movie canceled itself out. So you're going to have to pay me anyway. And thankfully, everybody was excited and 100% on board to make it. And so we did.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that kind of tenacity, I think, is something that really, really just, emphasizes the passion that, creatives have, because there have been so many stories like this, but you see the other type of outcome where it doesn't get made. It just gets scrapped, or they bring in like a Frankenstein team of people to like haphazardly put it together, and
Yeah.
it just, so it's really great that you guys had a really good time together on it. Because yeah, I love that, because I'm gonna watch it, and I watched it before, but I'm gonna watch it again, because stories like this kind of recontextualize it, and I think there's a lot more to appreciate when you rewatch something after hearing how it was done behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective, because I think that unfortunately independent cinema so often gets attacked by the people who just feel the need to talk shit about stuff,
Yeah.
and it's like, you don't understand how hard it is when you have, even if you have a couple $100,000, that's not a lot of money when you're paying 30 people's paychecks for a month at a time, and when you're paying for equipment that costs $1,000 a day, if not more, to rent, and paying actors that have names to come and shoot something in a fucking no name town that they've never heard of, 3,000 miles from their home in California or wherever.
Right.
So I do appreciate that, and it's at the end of the day, it's one of those things where, like, the experiences of these movies where you deal with the hardships and the rocky nature of independent film, like, it does build tenacity, and it builds endurance and integrity, I think, as a filmmaker. And I hope that people look at me in that regard, because it's hard. The 21 years of me making films at this point has not been an easy road. I love the rewards that have come from it, and what I mean by that is I have completed projects that people can look at. And I didn't let my crews down. When I said I will help us get these movies done, I made sure that the movies were finished and released. I never gave up on a movie, because I'm not the only one that would suffer from that. And so for that, I pat myself on the back, and I say thank you to my cast and crews for sticking through the hard times with me and with everybody that produced these things with me. But at the end of the day, it's tough, man. It is real tough, and I've been screwed over more than I'd like to admit, and have hopefully learned enough lessons to not let it happen again, and to help teach other independent filmmakers that are younger than me how not to make those same mistakes.
Right. And kind of pivoting to a different subject here, but one of the first things I told you, I think one of the first projects I watched of yours was A Chance in Hell, and I love the homage to the Old Boy hallway scene. So with that kind of camera work, because that kind of shot, you got that smooth pan or dolly. Usually it's a scene with no cuts, right? It's just that fluid motion. Are you partial to any sort of cinematography like that? Because this podcast, as you could see, is called The Longest Take. It's inspired by long takes, because I'm personally a huge fan of oneers. So just, you had that shot in your movie. Do you ever kind of have that mindset when you're making a project, like, can I do something cool as hell right here? Or do you think I could do a oneer for this particular shot? That ever
Well,
come into play?
and I don't know if you've been watching The Studio lately, the one on Apple.
Yes.
Dude, I mean, that it's so anxiety inducing because of all the oneers. It's insane. But yeah, I like I said earlier, I really love production design. The other element of filmmaking that I think makes a movie excel visually is the cinematography and the lighting, obviously. I really respect filmmakers like Ridley Scott and Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, the people that and they're not even digging into the real deep recesses of like actual like hardcore cinematographer based type movies, but just movies that I grew up loving because of how visually stimulating they were to me. I think that cinematography is essential to creating a film that people will retain attention on, or maintain attention with. And so I always do my best to try and come up with fun camera angles and movements. But a lot of times it's honestly just the collaborative efforts that I have with my cinematographers. On A Chance in Hell, my cinematographer, Mitch Martinez, had just gotten a Red 1, which at the time was the first prosumer 4K camera. He had, professional lenses with it. So it just looked better than anything else that I had done at that time. And so I don't remember if it was him or if it was myself or if it was with my co-writer, John Halusik, who suggested the Old Boy take, but I would imagine, I mean, that's 15 years ago now, but I have to imagine that we were probably going through, we did a script read through in the location with the actors and went from scene to scene where we pictured it playing out as they make their way through this Nazi facility to find, the radio room and whatever else they're looking for. And that moment where they're being attacked, it's like, okay, well, we can shoot them running up a flight of stairs with zombies chasing them, and we can shoot them closing a door and leaning against the door while the zombies bang on the other side trying to break it down. But at the end of the day, like, that's not exciting. It's just them being chased. How do we actually show them fighting through a horde of zombies? And the location, although it does look big, it was actually rather small. And so we had to find ways of using the same hallways at different angles to make it look bigger and not reusing the same stuff. And so that hallway is the one room, which was actually a room, not a hallway, where we could make it look like they were running down a hallway and encountering like 4 or 5 zombies as the 2 guys were trying to make it to whatever is beyond that hall. We set up a dolly track with probably 25 feet of dolly track there, and Mitch sat on the dolly cart with his camera, and we had a dolly grip, and we just started moving, and we choreographed the whole thing with the actors. And yeah, I mean, that's how it all came together. But Old Boy was definitely the reference. You picked it 100%.
Yeah, I love that. I live for those kinds of scenes in movies. I watched Marvel's Thunderbolts recently, and it's only like 45 seconds, and it's a lot of CGI, but there's a wonder in that, or like it looks like a wonder. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, all right, you checked the box that I'm always looking for, no matter what I'm watching.
Sure.
So I love that. And so my last question here, one piece of it is, where do you see yourself in 5 years, professionally or personally? But on the other side, and it'll probably tie into your, upcoming, next few years. But, let's go into a little bit about Better Luck Than Chuck. I know that's coming, right? So,
yeah. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because we're really excited about Better Luck Than Chuck. We just had our world premiere of the pilot, the first episode of the season. So we shot a 6-episode season last March, and we just had the premiere this last Friday in Denver at Series Fest for episode 1 of 6 for our inaugural season. And, to see myself over the next 5 years, I see myself continuing to be the head programmer and curator of Screambox. My sincerest hope is that last fall I was a supervising producer of a show for Screambox, the first Screambox original episodic series that's releasing later this summer, called The Trouble with Tessa. And, it was a very low budget effort by a couple of very talented showrunners named Dennis and Bethany, and their co-writer Will. And I'm really excited about the fact that, in my opinion, is going to open the gateway to me getting Cineverse to provide me with the ability to produce additional shows. And so in 5 years, I see myself having produced at least 1, if not 2 episodic shows a year for Screambox and Cineverse in the horror genre to give Screambox more content. I would like to see Better Luck Than Chuck, which is a horror trivia game show. It has been perpetuated at that point 5 years from now with multiple seasons. People have fallen in love with the brand of Better Luck Than Chuck, the dual host dynamic that we have with the female character, the widow, and her dead husband, Charlie, which, if you haven't seen my movie Skeletons in the Closet, you can see kind of an initial iteration of those characters of mine in Skeletons in the Closet as late night movie talk show hosts. They're very much Elvira meets the Crypt Keeper, and they're our game show hosts. And so they have this fun banter and this narrative with their characters while we're also playing trivia with the contestants. And I think that's a lot of fun and unique to a game show. So hopefully by then people will, kids will be dressing up as the Widow and Charlie for Halloween. That's the real dream come true right there. And so, and if all of that is happening at the same time, then I believe that 5 years from now, people will be taking me more seriously and Scotchworthy Productions more seriously and saying, okay, well, you want to make something for $2 million? Let's do it. We're not scared that we're not going to make that money back, because you do know what you're doing and your team is competent and reliable and tenacious. And so you're going to do it if you say you are. So yeah, that's really what I see. And I'm excited for the future. I'm exhausted, but, and I'm only getting older, but I'm excited about the future for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, the one good thing and I guess bad thing about film is like it's not something you really age out of, because you see that. I mean, you've got filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, who's pushing, I don't know, he's in his 80s at this point, right? And he's still, yeah. But I think that's that's really cool. And is there anything with Better Luck Than Chuck that's out already? Or have you been waiting on releasing?
Yeah, so just to kind of like comment on what you said there, it's like, yes, filmmaking can be timeless as long as you have the ability to continue doing it physically and mentally, of course. You know, right. I do think that there's something to be said for having a younger generation as you start to get, like me, I'm in my mid 40s now. So I do not understand the lingo that college and high school kids are saying nowadays. I don't know what's hip in pop culture to sound like an old man. So I think that there is something to be said for having the tie into that, because only so many people appreciate nostalgia. Right. But yeah, so Better Luck Than Chuck at this point. So obviously I have my hands dipped into a lot of different pies, I guess, at this point. You know, Screenbox is separate from Better Luck Than Chuck. Screenbox is separate from Scotchworthy Productions. And so even though Scotchworthy Productions produces content for Screenbox, like Bloody Bites, at the same point in time, something like Better Luck Than Chuck is currently separate from Screenbox. And so, you know, we have, like I said, a 6-episode season. It's pretty awesome. It features director questions from people like Mike Flanagan, BJ McDonald, Brad Grant, Chad Villella. You know, a number of different horror icons have contributed to the show. We gathered 15 amazing contestants from around the United States with incredible personalities and a wealth of horror knowledge to test their insight into fright on the game show. And we think it turned out great. I mean, the reception at the premiere last Friday was incredibly positive. We had so many people that weren't even horror fans coming up to us afterwards saying, I'm not even a horror fan, and either I would totally watch this or I need to watch more horror movies now because that was so much fun. I'd watch it just for the hosts. It was colorful. It was funny. It was witty. So I love hearing all of that. So my hope is that we're currently looking for a sale. The market, quite frankly, it sucks right now, and everybody knows that. And so it's like, you know, they play the game, and so it's like you don't want to sell yourself short, because when you know you have something that is a brand that could be established and really perpetuated, you don't want to give it away that easily. And I've been screwed in the past. So we're being patient and we're being diligent and hoping that if enough people see it, that we're going to generate the buzz kind of grassroots wise. And then from there, you know, the sky's the limit, you know, at that point. We just want to find a partner that appreciates what we created and understands that this is just the beginning. You know, our season 1 was literally our litmus test on this project. And now that we know that not only horror fans will enjoy it, but that non-horror fans can enjoy it, now we have to find someone who says, I recognize what you recognize. Let's get it out there. Let's get season 2 and 3 underway immediately, because we need to maximize on the potential of this. Right. And then the rest is, you know, as I say, the rest is history. Like I want nothing more than to retire on Better Luck Than Chuck. I want to make 30 seasons of it. I want The Widow and Charlie to become horror icons as to the likes of Elvira and the Crypt Keeper and, you know, all of the other iconic horror characters that are out there at this point. I truly believe they have that potential as a horror fan, as a filmmaker and a storyteller. And I just think it's a matter of time and of exposure. So fingers crossed that everything works out. And we at Better Luck Than Chuck appreciate any and all support, including yours, Sean, to help us, get the word out about it. And so as of right now, you cannot see it anywhere unless you catch it at a film festival. And we're hopefully going to have a handful of other festival screenings here in the near future. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'll keep my eyes peeled for that because I'm definitely interested. Especially just, is it a live studio audience? Like you pull up random people, or it's you already filmed everything and you just show what you filmed?
So we the contestants are real people. Mm-hmm. They're contestants. They are not actors. We did a post on Bloody Disgusting about a year before we started, or not a year, but maybe like 3 or 4 months before we started shooting. And we said, hey, we're looking for horror fans to be in a horror trivia game show. We had a number of submissions, sent to us, and we narrowed it down to 15 people that had great personalities. They did really awesome submission videos, and we felt like they would be good contestants. And they were from all over the U.S., from coast to coast and north and south, east, west. And so we did not have a live studio audience because this, again, was our first endeavor down this road. So
right.
Our hosts were, though Adam and Alexis are both very good with impromptu acting, and their improv styles and comedic value is awesome. They lent such an additional level of humor to the show that was not in the script. But ultimately, I know that with people watching and cheering, they would have been a lot more nervous and it wouldn't have hit as well. So it felt more intimate. Like it takes place in a basement. That's the set. It's very much like MTV's Remote Control from the late 90s. If you're familiar with that show at all. So we wanted it to feel intimate. And, when you already have 20 crew members on set, it's hard for something to feel intimate. And when there's no ceiling because it's literally a set and there's lights above you. So, But I'll tell you what, I think it is the thing I'm most proud of in my 21-year career as a filmmaker. My wife, my wonderful, amazing muse of a wife, Meredith, is my co-creator on the show. It was her idea. She pitched it to me and she developed it. She came up with the title. She designed the set herself. She literally laid the tile on the floor, helped with the shag carpet podium platform thing, painted the podiums. She is a goddess sent to me from a higher power to make my life better. And if it wasn't for her, I would not have what I have right now with this show and the ability to promote something to my fellow horror fans. And I'm so fucking excited for people to see Better Luck Than Chuck when it comes out.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I loved getting to talk with you and kind of getting into your mindset and your creative process. I know you just spoke a lot about Better Luck Than Chuck, but before we let you go here, is there any last minute thing you want to plug? Anything you got coming? Any websites, crowdfunding, all that fun stuff?
I've never ventured into crowdfunding. I don't want to put my time into the campaign that it involves because it's so time consuming.
Yeah.
I would love for people, look, everybody's on Instagram. Everybody in our generations is on Instagram. It doesn't take a lot of effort. If you're interested in horror and you're clearly listening to your podcast, do us a solid. Go to Better Luck Than Chuck on Instagram and follow us. Go to Scotchworthy on Instagram, follow us. Go to Bloody Bites TV on Instagram, follow us. Go to Screambox TV on Instagram, follow us. Bloody Disgusting on Instagram, follow us. Because every single person helps. Over the weekend, we added almost 200 followers to our Better Luck Than Chuck Instagram account, which is not a lot, but when you're doing it by word of mouth, that's a lot, and every little bit helps. And it's so hard to go viral nowadays. And again, I'm not a kid. I don't know how to use social media and stuff. So all we can say is like, look, horror fans, I know that you have your loves and you have your hates, and I know that you're gonna look at something with fine-tuned eyes and opinions, and that's what we want. But at the same point in time, it's like, if you want quality horror, you may not love it, but give it a chance. Check out my stuff, because I'm a horror fan too, and I'm a lover of film and the technical care that goes into making a quality film. So Give my stuff a shot, because you probably have never even heard of it, and you might be surprised at what you find. So yeah, we're there.
Absolutely. It takes a community, you know?
Hell yeah. We always said with World of Death, one voice is one voice is a small yell, and an entire crowd, an army is a I don't remember what the phrase was. That was 10 years ago.
I think I get what you're going for. I think I could put it together, but
yeah. It's a force to reckon with. But people can go to scotchworthy.com. I have a store on there. You can pick up copies of a bunch of my movies on there. Skeletons in the Closet Blu-ray is pretty great. Fun 80s anthology. It's My Party I'll Die If I Want To. We just did a 15-year release DVD. It's a 2-disc set with the Choose Your Own Adventure version of the movie. It's got a comic that is the first 30 minutes, basically 30 pages of the sequel, You Would Die Too, if it happened to you. Lots of really great stuff on there. If you're an independent horror supporter, I highly appreciate and would love people to check that out. And again, thanks for taking the time to talk to me and help me promote my stuff.
yeah, of course. Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.